when nothing inside you celebrates. There is a kind of discipline that draws no attention, not even from the one practicing it. It does not feel heroic. It does not feel hard. It barely feels like anything at all. The morning comes. The body stands. The floor is cold. Hands move without ceremony. Breath settles while the room is still dark. Nothing inside applauds. Most people believe discipline should feel like effort. Like resistance overcome. Like a daily victory. That belief is why their routines collapse the moment the feeling disappears. They expect fireworks. They get silence. They assume something is wrong. Watch what actually happens. A person starts strong. New schedule. New rules. Muscles tight with intention. Friends nod approvingly. Then the body wakes up tired one morning. The air feels heavier in the lungs. The mirror offers no reward. The ritual feels plain. Unremarkable. So negotiation begins. Just today. Just this once. The chain loosens without drama. In old training halls, no one waited for discipline to feel special. A monk rose before dawn because the body had learned the hour. A swordsman tied his belt the same way each morning because the hands remembered. No one asked how it felt. Feeling was irrelevant. The act remained. True discipline does not announce itself. It settles into the body until absence feels louder than effort. Until skipping feels strange. Until nothing about it feels remarkable, and that is precisely the point. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, name the habit you keep renegotiating. One line. No explanation, the person who always starts again. Let me tell you about someone familiar. He sets the alarm with care the night before. Shoes placed by the door. Clothes folded. The plan feels clean. His shoulders carry a quiet confidence as he sleeps. Morning arrives without ceremony. The room is cold. Eyes open. For a moment, the body does not move. The bed is warm. The air stings the lungs. No one is watching. He stands anyway. Not with force. Not with pride. Knees stiff as they straighten. Feet touch the floor. The body remembers something the mind hasn't finished arguing about. In the kitchen, the light hums. The routine begins. Nothing dramatic happens. No surge. No resistance worth naming. Just minutes passing. This is where most people feel cheated. Later, he tells someone he's trying to be consistent. They nod politely. Another says, "You're really disciplined lately." The comment lands oddly. He feels exposed. The work did not feel disciplined. It felt ordinary. Almost forgettable. The praise creates distance, as if something fragile has been noticed too early. This is the pattern. He starts again because starting feels meaningful. The first week carries tension. Muscles ache. Breath shortens. Friends notice. The second week flattens. The body adapts. The ritual loses its edges. No one comments now. Inside, the question forms without words, is this it? One morning, the alarm sounds and nothing inside him reacts. No excitement. No dread. Just a hand reaching out. Later, he skips. Not out of rebellion. Out of confusion. The absence of feeling feels like a warning. The chain breaks quietly. By evening, he tells himself tomorrow will be better. He has said this before. Watch the body when discipline hasn't settled yet. Shoulders tense as if preparing for negotiation. Jaw tight. Breath shallow. Each action requires consent. When that consent is not emotionally rewarded, the body withdraws cooperation. It waits for a reason. None arrives. In places where training lasted decades, this stage was expected. The dullness. The flattening. The moment when effort disappears and identity has not yet taken its place. Knees fold onto the mat. The mat feels no different than yesterday. The instructor says nothing. Others move without looking around. Social friction appears here. No applause. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of breathing in fabric. This is where many stop. Not because it is hard. Because it feels small. Because nothing confirms that it matters. The person who always starts again mistakes silence for failure. He does not yet know what silence is preparing him for, where negotiation quietly takes control. This is where most mornings quietly collapse. Not in failure. In discussion. The body sits on the edge of the bed. Feet rest on the floor. The floor is colder than expected. The spine hesitates. Breath pauses halfway in. A thought appears without sound, maybe later. No drama. Just a small opening. The body waits. It has learned this pause. Shoulders lift slightly, as if bracing for a verdict. The jaw tightens. Fingers curl and uncurl. Nothing has gone wrong yet. That is the danger. When resistance feels manageable, the mind steps in to manage it. Negotiation begins its work. Just today. You trained hard yesterday. You slept badly. The words feel reasonable. They carry concern. The body responds with relief. Muscles soften. Weight sinks back into the mattress. The social world supports this. No one will know. No one expects you to be exact. Messages can be answered later. The schedule is flexible. Flexibility sounds mature. In training halls, this moment was trained against without naming it. The bell rang. Bodies moved. Knees folded onto the mat before opinions formed. The mat felt the same every day. Cold through fabric. Pressure on the joints. Breath counting itself back into rhythm. No one asked if it felt necessary. The question never arose. Watch what negotiation does to the body over time. The alarm rings and tension appears immediately. Not from effort, but from decision. The chest tightens. The stomach feels hollow. Each morning becomes a trial. Some days are won. Many are postponed. The inconsistency shows up later, not as guilt, but as distrust. The body stops believing the signal. Social friction sharpens here. Friends joke about discipline being too extreme when you don't bend. They smile when you do. The smile teaches the wrong lesson. The flexible person is easier to be around. The predictable one makes others uneasy. Negotiation is socially rewarded. In old systems, the removal of choice was not cruelty. It was mercy. Fixed hour. Fixed action. When rain fell, training moved indoors. When sickness came, intensity dropped but the ritual remained. The body learned that discussion was unnecessary. Movement preceded permission. Until that happens, discipline will always feel remarkable when it appears and unbearable when it fades. The person caught here believes the battle is with laziness. It isn't. It's with the habit of asking. And that habit is learning faster than you think. The body learns before the mind agrees. There is a moment when effort quietly disappears, and it scares people. The routine continues, but the strain is gone. Shoes are tied without thought. Hands wrap the handle the same way. Breath settles earlier than expected. The body moves while the mind is still waking up. No signal announces that something has changed. At first, this feels like loss. Where is the tension that proved commitment? Where is the resistance that made the act feel earned? Without it, the ritual feels thin. Almost empty. The floor is still cold. The air still sharp in the lungs. But the shoulders no longer brace. The jaw loosens. The pulse steadies sooner. The absence of struggle feels suspicious. This is where many interfere. They add intensity. They change the routine. They look for something to feel again. The body notices the disruption immediately. Movements hesitate. Timing fractures. Breath loses its quiet rhythm. What was becoming automatic is pulled back into choice. In long training, this stage was protected. Repetition was kept plain on purpose. Knees folding onto the mat felt no different on the 100th day than the first. The sameness trained something deeper than endurance. It trained expectation. The body began to treat the action as neutral, like standing or sitting. Not good. Not bad. Just done. Social friction increases here in subtle ways. People ask why you still do it if you don't enjoy it. They suggest rest, variety, balance. Their concern sounds reasonable. Your answer sounds thin even to you. You don't have a story anymore. No struggle to report. No breakthrough to describe. Only the fact that the body keeps showing up. Watch the internal shift closely. When the alarm fails one morning, the body wakes anyway. Something feels off. Not guilt. Displacement. The absence of the ritual creates a low hum of irritation. The day feels misaligned. Shoulders sit wrong. Attention scatters. You realize the practice was holding you together without asking for credit. This is not motivation. Motivation is loud and unreliable. This is orientation. Like gravity. When it's present, nothing is said. When it's gone, everything feels strange. The person here begins to understand why true discipline feels unremarkable. It has stopped asking to be noticed. But this stage is unstable. Without care, it collapses back into negotiation or inflates into pride. Both break the same thing. The body is learning quietly. The mind is still tempted to interfere. And the next pressure will decide which one leads, when continuity replaces perfection. This is where the illusion of intensity finally breaks. The body shows up not at its best, but at its usual. Some mornings the legs feel heavy. A dull ache sits behind the knees. The breath takes longer to settle. Nothing is wrong. The ritual begins anyway. Smaller. Slower. Still intact. Most people quit here because they mistake reduction for failure. They believe discipline only counts when it looks complete. Full session. Full focus. Full output. When that image cracks, they step away entirely. The chain snaps not from weakness, but from pride. In places where training survived generations, this mistake was trained out early. When fever came, the monk still sat, even if only for a few breaths. When injury appeared, the swordsman practiced footwork without speed. The body stayed inside the shape of the ritual. Continuity was guarded more fiercely than performance. Feel what happens when this rule is followed. On a low morning, the belt is tied anyway. Fingers feel clumsy. The knot sits slightly off. No one corrects it. Knees fold onto the mat. Pressure on the joints is sharper today. Breath catches, then finds a slower rhythm. The session ends earlier than usual. The body stands. The chain remains unbroken. Social friction appears again, quieter this time. Someone says, "Why bother if you're not going all in?" The question sounds logical. Your answer doesn't. You don't explain. You clean up. You leave. Later, the body carries a faint steadiness through the day. Not pride. Alignment. This is where discipline begins to feel boring to others. There is no drama to share. No confession. No victory story. Just the same action repeated at different intensities. Friends stop asking about it. Invitations adjust themselves around your schedule. Predictability sets a boundary without announcement. Inside, something else changes. Missed days begin to feel heavier than imperfect ones. Skipping creates a residue that lingers. A low-grade irritation. The body senses a gap. It wants the ritual back, even in reduced form. This is not guilt. It's continuity asserting itself. Those who never reach this stage believe discipline requires willpower every day. Those who live here know better. The will was used earlier, to protect the chain when it became unimpressive. What remains now is maintenance. Quiet, uncelebrated, and fragile in a different way. Because the next pressure won't come from exhaustion. It will come from disruption. And the response to that will reveal whether continuity has truly taken root. Pre-decided responses remove the struggle. Disruption arrives without warning. Rain against the window. A late message. A schedule torn open by something unplanned. The body pauses. Not from resistance, but from uncertainty. This is where many routines fracture. Not in effort, but in improvisation. Watch the moment closely. The shoulders lift. Breath shortens. The mind reaches for options. Should this still happen today? Is it worth adjusting? The body waits for instruction. This is the gap where discipline usually leaks out. In older systems, this gap was sealed in advance. When rain fell, training moved indoors. When time shortened, the ritual compressed. When injury appeared, intensity dropped but the action remained. The response existed before the problem. The body did not ask. It executed. Feel the difference. A sudden delay pushes the schedule back. The room is unfamiliar. The floor is harder. The light is wrong. Hands still move. The belt is tied. The knot feels rushed. Knees fold. Pressure spreads through the legs. Breath is uneven, then steadies. Shorter session. Same beginning. Same ending. No debate. Social friction sharpens here. Others watch you adjust without comment and feel something tighten. They ask why you're so rigid. Why you can't be spontaneous. You hear the question while wiping sweat from your neck. The answer doesn't form. The body has already moved on. Over time, the absence of decision removes fatigue. Mornings stop feeling heavy. Even difficult days lose their edge. Not because they are easier, but because they are simpler. The body recognizes the pattern regardless of conditions. Rain or sun. Early or late. Quiet or noise. The same doorway is crossed. This is where discipline truly stops feeling remarkable. There is no sense of overcoming obstacles because obstacles no longer interrupt the sequence. They are absorbed. The ritual bends without breaking. Others mistake this for inflexibility. It isn't. It's preparation. Inside, something subtle locks into place. When plans fail, irritation fades faster. When chaos appears, movement returns sooner. The body trusts the response because it has rehearsed it. Trust replaces effort. Those who never pre-decide responses remain trapped in constant adjustment. Each disruption costs them energy. Each choice drains the signal. They believe discipline is exhausting. They have never removed the question. But this stability carries a quiet risk. Predictability attracts attention. And attention invites judgment. The next pressure will not test the system. It will test the identity forming inside it, when others start feeling uneasy around you. The change doesn't announce itself. It shows up in pauses. In invitations that arrive later. In jokes that carry a thin edge. You keep the same hours. The same movements. The same refusal to explain. Others begin to notice because your predictability removes something they rely on. You arrive when you said you would. You leave when it's time. The body doesn't rush. Shoulders stay level. Breath stays low. Someone asks if you can stay longer. The request hangs in the air. You feel the weight of it in your chest. You decline without sharpness. The room shifts slightly. This is social friction at its quietest. No argument. No confrontation. Just the discomfort of a boundary that doesn't bend. People read it as judgment even when none is present. Your routine reflects something back to them. Something unresolved. In training spaces, this phase was expected. The practitioner who never negotiated made others restless. He didn't complain. He didn't boast. He simply moved when it was time. Knees to mat. Hands to handle. Breath returning to count. The sameness unsettled those still deciding each day. Notice what happens inside you now. When someone questions your rigidity, there is no surge of defense. The jaw doesn't clench. The pulse doesn't spike. The comment passes through. The body has learned where it stands. Identity has taken over the work that motivation used to perform. This is where discipline fully loses its emotional charge. There is no pride in being different. No hunger for approval. The practice no longer proves anything. It simply occupies its place. Like gravity. Like posture. Like sleep. Others misread this neutrality. They think you've become cold. Too serious. Too fixed. You hear it in their tone. The words land without sticking. Later, alone, you notice how calm the body remains. How quickly attention returns to the next action. The next repetition. But this stage tests something deeper. Predictability can harden into performance if watched too closely. The body can begin to hold tension again, this time to maintain an image. The shoulders lift. Breath tightens. The ritual risks becoming a statement instead of a necessity. Old systems guarded against this by removing the audience. Training continued whether anyone was present or not. The floor felt the same. The mat offered no praise. The body answered only to the hour. If discipline is to remain unremarkable, it must stay private inside you, even when others react. The next pressure will test whether your routine exists for itself, or for how it looks from the outside, the quiet moment when identity locks in. It happens without ceremony. One day, the routine is interrupted completely. Travel. Illness. A broken schedule. The body wakes in a different room. The light is unfamiliar. The air smells wrong. For a brief second, there is nothing to follow. Then something settles. Not urgency. Not panic. Orientation. Hands reach for what is available. The floor is harder here. Knees still fold. The movement is smaller. The breath finds a count slower than usual. No one is watching. No record is kept. The body completes the shape because it recognizes itself inside it. This is the moment discipline stops being something you maintain. It becomes something you return to. Notice the internal state. There is no pressure to make it count. No urge to compensate. The shoulders drop. The jaw unclenches. The pulse steadies on its own. The act is quiet enough to be almost forgettable. And yet, missing it would feel wrong, like leaving a sentence unfinished. At this stage, the absence of practice is louder than the practice itself. Skip once and the body carries a faint misalignment through the day. Attention drifts. Movements feel slightly off. Not dramatic. Persistent. The body wants its axis back. Social friction barely registers now. Comments slide past. Invitations adapt without discussion. Others stop testing your boundaries because there is nothing reactive to push against. Your routine has become boring to them. Predictable. And therefore immovable. This is where people misunderstand true discipline most. They expect intensity. They expect visible sacrifice. They expect a story. What they see instead is neutrality. The same hour. The same preparation. The same exit. No explanation offered. No energy spent defending it. Inside, the practice feels lighter than ever. Not because it is easy, but because it is no longer heavy with meaning. It doesn't symbolize progress. It doesn't prove character. It simply occupies its place, like eating or sleeping. Necessary. Unremarkable. Old training halls measured this stage carefully. The practitioner who reached it no longer needed correction. Not because he was perfect, but because he was oriented. When something disrupted the flow, he returned without drama. When nothing disrupted it, he continued without noticing. This is the final inversion. In the beginning, discipline feels remarkable because it is rare. At the end, it feels unremarkable because it is normal. The extraordinary thing is not how hard it is to start. It is how strange it feels when it's gone. If discipline still feels loud to you, still emotional, still something you need to convince yourself to perform, the process is not finished. Silence has not yet arrived. And silence is the signal, discipline when nothing needs proving. At the end of this path, discipline no longer feels like an achievement. It doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel noble. It doesn't even feel difficult. It feels like posture. Like the way the body stands when it knows where it is. This is where most definitions collapse. Discipline is not something you summon each day. It is not an emotion you generate. It is not a mindset you hype yourself into. It is what remains when negotiation has been removed and identity has taken its place. The unshakable person is not the one with the strongest will. It is the one who no longer argues. When the hour arrives, the body moves. When disruption appears, the response is already waiting. When no one is watching, nothing changes. This is why true discipline feels unremarkable. There is no friction left to dramatize. No inner speech to perform. No story to tell others. The practice sits where it belongs, and the rest of life arranges itself around that fact. If you are still looking for discipline to feel powerful, you are still in the early stages. Power is loud. Identity is quiet. And quiet is stable. The question is no longer whether you can stay consistent. The question is whether you are willing to become someone for whom consistency is no longer a choice. Comment your commitment. One sentence. No explanation. No context. Just the action.